most necessary may likewise be regarded as a powerful value. Discrimination, again, arises from the nature of the person himself. Discrimination causes him to choose that which is inevitably satisfactory to himself. Or if he has been developing along scientific or industrial lines, discrimination causes him to choose such products as seem to be the best value in terms of their economic worth. Always discrimination, however, seeks to divide the lesser from the greater, the real from the unreal, the satisfactory from the unsatisfactory, the good from the less good. And as all these terms are relative, our problem of value goes right back again to our own ability to estimate value. Now, man's objective sensory structure is not always, in fact, not usually, able to actually estimate value. When we search for things of value, we are searching out of some kind of knowledge which we believe that we possess. Going back to our Chinese story again, we can imagine that a person is wandering among the shops of Canton. He would like very much to bring home with himself some valuable Chinese things. He has some taste. If the Chinese were asked to describe the taste of the average tourist, I'm afraid, however, it would not be very glowing as a description. The average tourist in the Chinese thinking or the Chinese art world is lovingly referred to as a one-time pigeon. He is the individual who has money enough to buy something and will never be seen again, so you may as well give him anything you think will please him and make as much money as possible. This is the problem of the man wandering the street of Canton. But he is now focusing all that he knows upon the important problem of trying to outwit a Chinese in his own business, which is not easy. So he says to himself, I want to buy some Chinese art. How am I going to tell whether it's good or not? So he calls upon traditional value. He says to himself, if it's old, it's good. Now, we apply that criterion to people, we wouldn't get very far. Because there's no way of proving that a person has become a magnificently valuable thing simply because he has become an antique. So we are not quite sure of this. But the idea now is that as it gets older, it gets better. But the Chinese gentleman has also played checkers with this situation before and knows exactly what to do. He has taken the most recent things he has, dipped them in coffee and tea, rubbed them, thrown them around the store, and buried them for a couple of weeks. At the end of this time, they are in a pretty badly dilapidated condition. So our individual, who is working from a yardstick of decrepitude, sees this tattered thing and says, here is value. Here is something that must have actually come from the home of Confucius. Nothing could be as dilapidated as this and be less than 1,000 years old. So a very beaming merchant sells it to him at a ridiculously low price, and everybody is happy. Happy, of course, unless the buyer sometimes tries to sell his object. Then he discovers that he has something that is entirely worthless. But he is not likely to admit this. He will then decide that the new buyer is simply uninformed or attempting to rob him. So the illusion goes on to absurdity. Another traditional value that we have always in the superficial mind is that the more work that there appears to be on a piece of art, the more expensive it should be. The idea being that artists are paid by the hour. Therefore, if we find something that is simply loaded with ornamentation and decoration, in the most brilliant colors and in the most terrible confusion, this obviously represents a masterpiece. This is the way we view life. It has nothing that limits it to art. complexity becomes value to the uninformed. If it is difficult, it is good. It's like the elderly Scottish lady who went to church and heard the sermon. When she got through, someone asked her what the minister talked about. Oh, she said it was a wonderful sermon, but of course, I didn't understand a word of it. This is the idea. If we don't understand it, it's good. If it is very complicated, it is wise. If it is said in Latin, it is sovereign truth. In sober fact, it is simply another way of catching the unwary. The person who does not know mistakes the thing for good because it hits him in the face, a terrible blow. And I mean a shuddering blow in some cases. So he thinks he has a treasure because he has something that is very complicated. Another point in the traditional code is that it is more expensive if it is bigger. This is one of the most common situations. If it's 6 inches high, maybe it's worth $10. If it's 10 feet high, it is obviously worth a fortune. What it is seemingly makes very little difference. The uninformed buy by the pound, or by the yard, or by the foot. So the larger it is, the grander it is supposed to be. And many individuals have paid more to freight an object home than it was worth, simply because they bought something that was tremendous at what they regarded to be a very reasonable figure. So size is mistaken for value. Another thing, of course, that is mistaken for value is psychological size. The great professor is regarded as a highly important person, although he may or may not be particularly informed. When a very mediocre citizen becomes alderman, he becomes a gentleman of consequences. He's gotten larger suddenly. Therefore, he is more valuable. No one knows why, and during his term of office, he never does anything valuable. But he is still more valuable because he is an alderman. This again carries on into your art world. A signature, a name, a seal, great value. Of course, it may be forged. It may never have been anywhere near the artist whose name is there. But names become very valuable to people who have more faith than discrimination. Even assuming that the name was genuine, we have no reason to assume that a name or a seal alone is the certainty of excellence. Perhaps if it is genuine, it gives us a greater sense of assurance. Antonio Stradivarius made some of the greatest violins the world has ever known. But every violin which he signed is not a great violin. Some are pretty bad. So the name does not necessarily stand for value. But in the shopping world, it becomes a very important symbol. We know this today, where names have become recognized as symbols of integrity. Years ago, they may have been. Today, it is very doubtful if the name has much meaning. But we still follow it because we are leaning on crutches. We want some patent way to determine value without having the skill to discover it for ourselves. So we go along the street of Canton and we look for other ways of determining value. In the search for value, we are often involved in the quest for the bargain. One thing that seems to increase value is if there is a possibility that the worth of something is greater than its price. We feel in this way that we have come into the presence of an opportunity to have something that is worth more than we have reasonably paid for it. This is the most terrible snare which has caught not only followers of art, but followers of every line in the world, including modern merchandising, is this desperate search for the bargain and the substitution of the idea of the bargain as a means of getting something of value greater than its cost. The Oriental art merchant is well acquainted with this trick and has lured many persons into buying something that was half price and which the true value of which was less than half of the price that was finally paid. In discrimination, the bargain is of no value in determining whether or not something is suitable to our need or to our purpose. If we are in a situation where economy is extremely vital, then we certainly must make use of every possible opportunity to secure things reasonably. But in terms of value, we seldom get a bargain. We get something that is usable, but not a bargain. So all through the world, this search for value runs against imposture, and it runs against the skill, the almost incredible skill of those who are attempting to falsely stimulate our avarice or our desires to acquire things. So value is not to be found in this way alone. Now, there have been several great artists and art collectors who have sought for value. And for a minute, I would like to pause and give them some consideration, because I think that the whimsies of these people are interesting to us. There was a very great collector of Chinese porcelains. This man had one of the finest collections in the world. He spoke no Chinese, and until the very last years of his life, he never went to China. He finally did make one visit. But he had an uncanny ability to know great Chinese art. And some of the finest collections of the world today were built upon the material which he accumulated. This man had the uncanny ability to sense value. Now, this was something that he was born with. He was a collector at a time when great collections of Oriental art were almost unknown out of China. He collected at a time, naturally, when great and fine examples of art went a-begging, and he got for a few dollars things that today are worth thousands. But this was not his real genius. His real genius was to step into a situation in which no one cared, and no one seemed to know, and no one seemed to appreciate. And in this situation, to suddenly discover a concept of value which had been ignored, but which enabled him to move into a field in which he was practically alone. Therefore, to do almost exactly as he pleased in this field. He therefore must be regarded as one whose sense of value transcended the traditional and went into a completely neglected area. Most Europeans of his time, and he was European, were much interested in Renaissance and in the early European primitives and the great European masters. And as a result of this interest, the prices of these things were rising, as they have continued to rise even now, until they became, we might say, the luxuries of the very rich, or in our generation are destined almost inevitably for institutions. Private persons can no longer own them. In the midst of this tremendous overemphasis upon European art, this man discovered Asiatic art. He found, moving into London and Paris and the great art centers of the world, marvelous examples of the beautiful paintings, ceramics, silks, jades, and bronzes of China. He became fascinated with them. He knew they were good. And so, ridiculed by his contemporaries as being the collector of trash, he gradually acquired the great treasures which, up to the time of the recent revolution, the Chinese themselves were trying to get back. He became a tremendous authority because he broke through and discovered meaning. He discovered value. Now, how did he describe his own experience? What did it mean to him as a person? He took the